God's chosen ones. The whole damn town worked together and still couldn't take you down. They needed a whole damn town just to try and take you out. And even then, they failed. Miserably. People who couldn't even agree on what to eat suddenly united like a secret army. But only when the target was you. They didn't come together for peace. Not justice, not love, only for your downfall. But here's what they didn't know. When you come for a chosen one, you declare war on the entire universe, backing them. And that was their first mistake. The town that turned on you. It didn't happen overnight. At first, it was subtle the way they looked at you, the way rooms fell quiet when you walked in, the way laughter paused, then restarted. Just a little too late, you told yourself it was nothing, that maybe you were overthinking, that maybe they were just having a bad day. But it wasn't just one day, was it? It was your name passed around like currency, your truth twisted into headlines no one printed but everyone read. It was the way your kindness was rebranded as manipulation, your silence weaponized. You weren't crazy. They just needed you to think you were, because if you ever realized who you were, they knew they couldn't touch you. This wasn't petty, it was prophetic. They toasted your downfall behind locked doors. They wore grins like armor and envy like perfume. They celebrated lies like scripture, not because you hurt them, but because you refused to shrink. They called it concern, but their eyes said competition. They weren't offended by your actions. They were threatened by your existence. And as the gossip grew, so did the alliance. People who never agreed on anything suddenly marched in unity, so long as the goal was to see you fall. They didn't realize the spiritual law they were violating. What you curse unjustly only multiplies in the hands of the chosen. And while they built their case, you stayed silent, not weak. Strategic, because you knew only fools scream in storms sent to test their silence. Now the truth is surfacing. The masks are slipping, and the same hands that pointed at you are now shaking. They thought you were the problem, but you were the prophecy they couldn't cancel. The seed they tried to bury, not knowing you were already becoming the earthquake. So let me ask you something. If the whole town came for you and you're still standing, what does that say about them? And what does it reveal about you? If this pierced your spirit, stay with me, because what's coming next was written before they ever spoke your name. Part 1, they played dirty, but you stayed clean. They whispered lies behind screens, sent rumors down telephone wires like poison veins, recruited people like pawns. Some you trusted, some you loved, all convinced that if they moved as one, they could dismantle you. They didn't come with truth. They came with schemes, slander, manipulation, surveillance. And the worst part, they convinced themselves it was righteous, that hurting you was healing themselves, that cutting you down was justified. But here's the thing, no one taught them about chosen ones. Clean hands swing harder. They threw dirt. You threw prayers. They cast shadows. You carried light. They studied your life like a blueprint they wanted to break. But they forgot. You didn't build this with human permission. You built it in silence, through heartbreak, through betrayal, through nights where your only friend was the voice of God whispering, "Keep going." So you did. You didn't clap back. You didn't post subtweets. You didn't beg anyone to clear your name, because the real ones don't chase clarity in chaos. They become it. And that's what scared them most. That after all their efforts, you didn't break. You got quieter, sharper, stronger. While they gathered in groups to compare your downfall, you sat in solitude and passed the test they didn't even know they were taking. It wasn't your strength that rattled them, it was your heart. That soft, unshakable, untouchable purity they couldn't fake and couldn't kill. They said you were too sensitive, too intense, too emotional. But that sensitivity, that's your spiritual radar. That intensity, That's your divine fuel. And while they mocked your stillness, you were becoming the storm. The truth is, they never wanted your downfall. They needed it. Because if you could rise, then their excuses wouldn't survive. So they tried to bury you. But you grew roots through concrete. Because what they didn't understand, and never will, is this: God doesn't bless the loudest voice in the room. He blesses the cleanest heart in the fire. And yours, still spotless. So the next time they ask, how did they survive all that? Because I fought with clean hands, and the whole damn universe fought with me. Part 2, they threw shadows, but you were the mirror. They thought you were just a person, just a target, just another name they could throw into the fire and watch disappear. But you weren't the fire. You were the mirror. And every dart they sent, every curse, every whispered ritual in dim rooms filled with incense and ego only revealed themselves. You didn't have to retaliate. Your light did the talking. Your stillness, that was your armor. See, here's what they forgot. When you throw shadows at the chosen, you're just lighting up the truth in your own face. They thought their curses were clever, their little spells, their cheap magic, their intentions soaked in envy and rage. But they forgot one law. Energy doesn't serve ego. It serves alignment. So every time they tried to hex you, every word soaked in malice, every smear behind your back, it circled back like a boomerang dipped in spiritual consequence. And you didn't flinch. Not because you're invincible, but because you're aligned. You didn't get here through shortcuts. You got here through sacred obedience. So no, their fire couldn't burn you, because you were covered in something they couldn't fabricate. Favor. Favor built in the silence, in the tears, in the wilderness seasons when you begged God to make it stop. But instead, He made you stronger. So now, they're haunted, jumpy, shaky, looking over their shoulders in empty rooms. Because when you play with shadows you don't understand, they come back looking for a home. You were never standing alone. The ancestors stood with you. The angels surrounded you. And the one who sees all was watching. They mocked your intuition, laughed at your sensitivity, called you too much. But now, they're the ones who hear whispers in the vents, see figures at the edge of their vision, sleep with lights on in the middle of the day, because the same spiritual world they disrespected has now turned the mirror back on them, and what they see is not you. It's their own guilt, their own jealousy, their own reflection, twisted and trembling. You weren't the one they hurt. You were the one who exposed them, and now every time your name is mentioned, every time your light is honored, they're reminded of the truth they tried to erase. You weren't the victim. You were the divine test, and they failed. Part 3, the puppeteer lost control. They thought they were the writer of your story, the architect, the mastermind pulling strings behind the curtain. They studied your moves, predicted your responses, smiled in your face while planning your collapse. And for a while, it almost worked. They weren't after closure. They were after ownership, not just of your life, but your narrative, your identity, your light. They didn't just want you gone. They wanted you broken by their hand. But here's the cosmic joke. Every string they pulled wrapped tighter around themselves. They manipulated people, falsified records, played both victim and villain, and convinced others they were the one needing protection. But something shifted. The same silence they used against you started echoing back at them, louder, heavier, unescapable. And the puppet show started falling apart. You see, they didn't expect you to detach, to stop reacting, to stop feeding the fire, because without your energy to feed on, their whole illusion collapsed. What used to be control became obsession. What used to be strategy turned to chaos. And now, they can't stop dreaming about you, not out of love, not even out of guilt, but because they failed, and they know it. You became the one thing they couldn't conquer, the mirror they couldn't distort, the truth they couldn't edit. They tried to erase you. But the more they tried, the clearer you became. They conjured lies, but your name kept rising in rooms they couldn't enter. They spread rumors, but people started asking questions they couldn't answer. And then the paranoia started creeping in. Night terrors, digital mistakes, trails they forgot to cover, receipts they couldn't explain. Because the God you serve doesn't miss a thing, he let them pull every string until they built their own gallows. You didn't have to clap back. You didn't need revenge. You just had to outlast the illusion. And now, the puppeteer's hands are trembling, the strings are tangled, and the audience is watching them fall. You weren't the puppet. You were the proof that the chosen don't play the game. They break the board. Part 4, family turned to foes. It wasn't the strangers that broke you. It wasn't the liars in back alleys or the critics online. No, the wound that bled the longest came from the hands that once tucked you in. The ones who knew your middle name. The ones who stood beside you in baby photos. The ones who said, "I'll always protect you," but opened the door when the wolves came knocking. You weren't just betrayed. You were offered up like a sacrifice because you were too much, too aware, too different, too awake in a family that worshipped sleep. And when your awakening made them uncomfortable, they didn't stand with you. They sided with the silence. They shared your secrets like souvenirs, used your pain as proof you were unstable, smiled in your face while taking notes for your enemies. They didn't just stab you in the back. They handed you the knife and said, "Cut yourself." And still, you tried to love them, to fix it, to make it make sense. But how do you make sense of betrayal when it came from people who helped write your name? You kept asking, was it always like this? Did they ever really love me? Was I ever safe or just convenient? The truth, they didn't just reject you, they rejected your calling. Because your elevation reminded them of their stagnation. Your clarity threatened their denial, and your light exposed their shadows. So they whispered, "She changed. He's acting brand new." But you didn't change. You just outgrew the box they built to contain you. And when they saw they couldn't control you, they chose to crucify you. And still, you kept your heart soft. You didn't retaliate. You didn't expose their dirt because you knew God was watching. And while they celebrated your exile, he was preparing your expansion. You thought their betrayal broke you, but it was the birthing place of your anointing. Because when family becomes foe, God becomes your family, and he sends replacements, not just blood, but soul family, the ones who feel like oxygen, the ones who see you without suspicion, the ones who love the real you, not the watered-down version they can control. You didn't lose family. You lost the illusion of it, and what's rising in its place is a tribe built by heaven. So no, you're not alone. You're not orphaned. You're not forgotten. You were removed from what was fake, so you could receive what was sacred. Part 5, they tried to bury you, but you became the crack. They thought you were weak, disposable, forgettable. So they buried you, deep beneath rumors, silence, and shame. They celebrated your funeral before you ever stopped breathing. They toasted to your collapse, laughed in rooms you once lit up, danced on the dirt they thought would cover you forever. But here's what they forgot. You were never the grave. You were the ground, and the ground was shifting. They didn't bury a body. They buried a fault line. And the moment their betrayal hit you, something cracked, not inside you, beneath them. Because chosen ones don't disappear when buried. We multiply, we deepen, we expand. You weren't being destroyed. You were being pressurized, shaped, aligned, positioned to rupture everything false built above you. And now they're running. But it's too late. The lie they built a life on, it's crumbling. The mask they wore, it's melting. the fake alliances they used to corner you, turning on each other. Because you weren't just the seed they tried to kill. You were the proof that their power was never real. Their control was borrowed. Their spotlight was staged. Their empire, built on stolen peace and manipulated stories. But your story was divine, unwritten by men, uncancelled by slander, sealed in spiritual stone. So when they tried to erase you, they erased their own covering. When they tried to bury you, they triggered their own collapse. And now, that town that once moved in harmony to see you fall is devouring itself. You were never the target. You were the test. And they failed. Not because you were perfect, but because you were aligned. They threw chaos. You answered with stillness. They summoned destruction. You stood in truth. And now your life is a sermon. Not preached from pulpits, but from survival. From scars. From the quiet resurrection no one saw coming. You are the storm they didn't forecast. The proof that God hides his warriors in plain sight. The soul they thought was small, but turned out to be the crack that collapsed their kingdom. They tried to bury you, but all they did was plant the earthquake. You didn't just survive, you were sent. Whispered, steady, like prophecy, soft enough to heal, sharp enough to awaken. You weren't crazy. You weren't dramatic. You weren't imagining the shift in the air when you walked into a room. What you felt, what they tried to convince you wasn't real, was spiritual warfare. And you, chosen one, you passed the test. Not because you were the strongest, not because you had backup, but because you had purpose. You stood in the fire, naked, alone, unarmed except for your clean heart and your stubborn truth. And when the flames tried to lick your name off the earth, you didn't burn, you glowed. That town didn't just target you, they were tested by you. And now they know, now you know, you were never just a person they hated. You were the signal that God had arrived. And they lost, not because you fought back, but because you stayed aligned while they lost themselves in illusion. So breathe now. Exhale the weight you've carried for years. This was never about punishment. This was preparation and your rise. It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true. So walk like the ground recognizes you. Speak like the air obeys you. Move like heaven put its name behind yours. Because it did. You didn't just survive betrayal. You exposed a system. You didn't just endure isolation. You became the light they can't turn off. You didn't just outlast the storm. You are the storm now. If they couldn't stop you when you were wounded, silenced, and alone, what can they do now that you know who you are? You were chosen, not by the crowd, not by the culture, not by coincidence, but by God to reveal, to rise, to rewrite what they tried to destroy. If your spirit whispered, "This is me," while watching, if your heart beat harder as truth unfolded, if your life mirrored this journey, drop 17 in the comments to confirm what your soul already knows. You weren't the villain. You weren't the victim. You were the vessel. Share this with someone else who's been buried, so they know it wasn't a grave. It was a beginning.